Hello everyone and welcome to this webinar. My name is Lucy Moore and I'm a Professional Education Manager at ACCA. Our session today is designed to support your preparation for the Advanced Financial Management exam, whether you're taking that exam by paper or CBE. And I'm really pleased to be joined by an expert tutor, Ben Wilson. Ben, can you just say a quick hello to everybody before I take us through how the session will run?
Sure. Hi, everybody, and welcome to this session. My experience of teaching the AFM paper, it is a technical paper. There's lots of detailed knowledge required. But the biggest thing that students can do to improve their exam performance is to build their exam technique. And what we're going to focus on in this session, in the main technical part of it, is really technique. How can you squeeze an extra 5 to 10 marks out of your knowledge to get you over the line and pass the paper?
Thanks, Ben. Okay, you're going to hear more from him shortly. He's going to kick off the session with his top tips for tackling AFM and how to earn marks in the exam. And then we're actually going to play you a video that Ben recorded in advance. And in this video, he works a key question from a past AFM exam, illustrating good technique, pitfalls to avoid, as well as giving you some excellent guidance on how to debrief your own answers during question practice. Okay, we're going to actually kick off with a really quick poll. So it might take a few seconds to come up on your screen, but we're really interested to know whether you're going to be taking AFM as a paper-based exam or a computer-based exam. And I should say that actually the advice that Ben gives you today is going to be relevant to you whichever way you're doing the exam. So don't worry, everything will be covered, but it would just be really interesting and helpful for us to know which one you're going for. So I think that's probably been up for about long enough now, so I'll give you a few more seconds. Okay, so 3, 2, 1, and we'll move on to the results and see. Okay, that's looking really consistent with the other sessions that we've run this week. We've had AAA and APM so far, and we've got about 2/3 of you saying that you're taking the exam by computer and 1/3 saying that you're preparing for the paper-based exam. Ben, I'm going to hand over to you at this point if you've got any reflections on that poll results, and then also to take us through your top tips for AFM before we watch your video.
Sure. Well, today's session is going to focus more on those that are sitting the computer-based exam, and a lot of the tips are specific to computer-based exams. But a lot of them are also relevant if you're sitting the paper-based version. So, for example, things like explaining or showing your calculations clearly, no matter what format you're sitting the paper in, that's vitally important. And so, although when you're watching the video, you'll be seeing me working through an exam question in the practice platform. A lot of the things I'll be saying will be relevant to you even if you are sitting the paper-based version. So top tips for the AFM exam, and these are all based on my experience as an AFM lecturer and based on the examiner's comments that are produced at the end of each exam sitting. So focusing on written questions first of all. You've got to make sure you answer all parts of a written question. Now, AFM, the examiner, is well known for including 2 or even 3 questions within the same requirement. And very often students only answer the first one or maybe the first 2, and they miss out the third one and they miss out on easy marks. So make sure you answer all parts, all subparts of the written requirement. Use the scenario. Now, a great technique in AFM is in any discursive or written answer to start your answer with a fact from the scenario. Now, it's a really applied exam, just like all of the exams at this level. You can't just rote learn the textbook and brain dump down your answer. You have to use the information in the scenario. So try to get into the habit of every point you write, starting it with a point from the scenario. And when you're expanding your answer plan into a full written answer, make sure your points are short and punchy. Now, be careful. The examiner does say they don't want bullet points and they don't want notes. They want full sentences. But a full sentence, really we're talking about 10 words, perhaps 10 to 12 words, 1 line to write up your full sentence. And we're looking at perhaps 2 sentences to explain each point. So we're keeping it short and punchy. And you'll see that when I go through the video, how I write in a concise style. In the calculation questions, make sure that your calculations follow a logical structure. There are loads of follow-on marks available in the AFM calcs. Sometimes these calculations are worth up to 15 marks, something like a big NPV calculation. And so you have to make your answer easy to follow. And a really good way of doing that is to work through the calculation in logical steps where you write little notes next to your numbers to explain what you have done at each step. I'm only talking 1 or 2 words, but you're just trying to make it easy for the marker to see what you've done and to follow your calculations. Because in AFM, there are lots of follow-through marks available. If you make a mistake at the start of the calculation, well, you can still be awarded full marks from there onwards, as long as you have made your calculations easy to follow. And there's that point about explaining your workings. These are difficult calculations that, there's more than one way to go about them. It isn't that there's a set pro forma that you have to follow for a calculation. And so the marker isn't automatically going to understand how you've approached the calculation. And so it's a really, really good idea, great practice to write a 1 or 2 word note next to each of your numbers just to explain what you've done, so the marker can really easily follow it. And if you make their life easy, the marker will work harder for you to find those follow-through marks. Now, speed in the calculations is absolutely critical. AFM is an exam where students struggle for time. And quite often it's the hard calculations that are a real time sap. You end up losing a lot of time there and not having enough time to do yourself justice in the written parts of the exam. So you've got to get through the calculations quickly. And sometimes a really good tip for students is, if there's a hard bit of the calculation, a really techie bit that it's going to take you 5 minutes to do that tough part of the calculation, that's not a good investment of your time. Perhaps leaving the hard bits out or just making an assumption so you can get through to a bottom number in the time available and then get on to the discussion parts, that can be a much more effective way of picking up marks in the exam. So if you are struggling for time, skip out the harder bits of the calculation and get through to the end and get on to the easier written parts. We're now going to go through a question from the September-December 2019 sample paper. You can get this paper from the ACCA's website, and I'm going to work through a couple of question parts here. Now, the screen's going to change slightly, and there'll be a slight delay while the video starts. We're using the sample questions from September-December 2019 for this recording. You can get these from the ACCA's website. And we're going to work through question 3. Here it is. We've got a page of information about the scenario in the background, and then over the page, we've got the requirements. We're going to work through parts A and B. I'll be working in the ACCA's Practice Platform software, and I always try to do this when I'm practicing questions because I get more familiar with the software, both the word processor and also the spreadsheet functionality. So within the blank workspace, I'm going to use both word processor and spreadsheet. I have both of these open, but I'm going to work with the word processor first of all. I'm going to need that for part A of this question. Now, good exam technique to make sure that I answer all parts of question A. I'm going to copy and paste it into the word processor, and I'm going to use it to set up my answer structure. And as so often in the AFM exam, there's more than one requirement here. First requirement, discuss the possible sources of financial synergy. Requirement 2, comment on the finance director's concern that synergy is overestimated. And then question 3, steps I could take to address the problem. Now, to make this a little easier to follow so you can see what I'm doing on screen, I'm going to bold type, but I wouldn't recommend you do this in the exam. It's a little bit time consuming and it doesn't really add that much value. It's just going to make it easier for you to review what I'm doing on screen. Now, great tip in any written question is try to use the scenario to generate your points. Remember, a synergy is 2 + 2 = 5, the combined company being worth more than the sum of its parts. And financial synergies is all about the kind of debt, equity, cost of capital, that kind of stuff, the finances of the business. So I find out in the second paragraph here that one of the companies, the acquiring company, Kerin, has significant cash reserves. But the second company, Danton, has really low cash reserves. Now, there's a potential synergy there, isn't there? That the acquiring company, Kerin, can use its cash reserves to finance the activities of Danton. Now, in my answer plan, I'm just going to have a short comment that refers back to that point, and then when I come to write the answer up fully, I'll expand that out. Okay, that's one financial synergy. Let's see if we can find some more. Oh, look here. Another thing about Danton, it says access to capital has acted on as a severe constraint on reinvestment potential. Oh, here's another point. We've got a narrow range of existing shareholders. Oh, and there's another point here. We're acquiring a company in another area of the country where competition is less intense. So it's in a different geographical market. It might have a different risk profile. Okay, I've got 4 points there that I'm then going to expand out when I write up my answer fully. And that's enough. This was an 8-mark question and there are 3 parts to it. So 4 points. I'm kind of thinking in general in AFM, a well-explained point gets 1 mark. So I'm thinking I've probably got 4 hopefully in the bag there. Right, comment on the FD's concern that synergy is often overestimated. And that comes from this paragraph down here. And actually, it's talking about 2 problems. Synergies might be overestimated or they might fail to materialize. So I'm going to kind of talk about both of those. I like breaking a question apart, it gives me more to say. And actually, when it comes to the other part of this question, steps I can take to address the problem, I'm going to use that same structure. Now, there isn't really anything in the scenario that tells me why synergies are overestimated. And so I'm going to have to use my knowledge a bit here, but I do like to use specific facts on the scenario where I can. And I'm told the size of these synergies. Look, there's 20.5 million of synergies. And who have they been estimated by? Oh, they've been estimated by Kerin's Chief Executive Officer. Now, why is it relevant that it was the chief exec of Kerin that estimated these? Well, they don't know that much about Danton. They're not in the weeds of Danton's numbers and the running of Danton's business, so they might not understand what's going on at the target effectively, and therefore they might not be able to estimate these numbers properly. And also, it's the chief executive officer that's done this. Perhaps, well, it seems like they're keen for this transaction to go ahead. They're trying to address a slide in their business. And so the chief executive might be biased. Why might these synergies fail to materialize then? Well, once we buy the company, it might be difficult to realize these because of change management issues. We might have a change in market conditions. You know, just think about companies that were bought before the COVID pandemic and then well, they'd be trying to materialize these synergies, these operating efficiencies, but they might not materialize because conditions change. Now, I'm not going to write about COVID at length in my answer, but that's just a reminder to me of my thought. Okay, how am I then going to address this problem by the board of overestimating? Well, that's around I might lack experience of doing this. Oh, that's another good point, actually. So I'm going to get some experts in, someone impartial, some due diligence. And how am I going to address the point that they might fail to materialize? Failing to materialize is that, market conditions might change. I might not be great at doing this. But for me to stand the best possible chance of delivering on synergies, I need to make sure that somebody, effectively implements. So that's about implementation, isn't it? So effective implementation. So I'm going to do things like assign responsibility, set targets. Excellent. I've now got an answer plan for all parts of this question for part A. Now it's time to write up this answer while the ideas are still fresh in my mind. The value of planning it out first, though, was that I know all of my ideas now. I'm able to write more briefly and more succinctly because I already know what I'm going to say. The next stage is just expanding these points out. So let's do that. On the financial synergies, that Kerin's cash rich and Danton is cash poor, the thought here was that we can use the funds from Kerin to fund the projects of Danton, isn't it? Okay. Nice short sentence to cover the point. We're going to use cash reserves from Kerin to fund Danton's projects, investing in any projects that would generate shareholder wealth, but we don't currently have enough money to do. Our next point was around lack of access to capital, wasn't it? So as part of a larger company, because Danton was small and on its own, as part of a larger company, the cash flows and the operations of the business would be more diverse and stable because they've got a wider range of activities, and that means they're more likely to attract bank funding, for example. Okay, they've currently got a narrow pool of shareholders, and through this acquisition, we'll have access to a wider pool of funds. So because we're then part of a big listed company, there's more people that we can attract to invest into the business. Fine. And then the last point, because we're in a different geographical market with a different risk profile, that means we're going to have a more diverse range of cash flows that lowers our cost of capital and boosts the NPV of our projects. Great. So because we've got this more diverse range of cash flows coming from a different geographical market that has a different risk profile, the cost of capital of the business would be lower because investors would be willing to accept a lower return because their returns are more stable, and that boosts our NPVs and the NPV of our projects and increases shareholder returns. Right, let's go on to the next bit. This 25.5 million of synergies. Why might they be overestimated? So general kind of introductory points, that 20.5 million of synergies coming out of the scenario are future cash flows, which are inherently uncertain. I don't know whether the conditions may change. And they've been estimated by our CEO based on the data of the target company. So we've got several points here. The first one is that there's a lack of access to any commercially sensitive or confidential information. And so the CEO might not be aware of issues that would reduce down the synergies. And my other points are he might not understand the Danton business, might not have experience of forecasting. So we've extended those points out. Then this point around potential bias, that's really saying the chief exec might really want this to go through, might be acting in their own interests rather than the interests of shareholders. It could be a kind of glorification project. And could be helping to meet their bonuses, that sort of stuff. But it really is getting at, what I'm getting here is agency costs, isn't it? That this could be in the chief exec's interest, but not necessarily in the interest of shareholders. What I'm getting at here with wanting to do it for personal reasons and overestimate these synergies to convince the wider board or shareholders to back the deal. And what I'm getting at there is the agency problem. And I'm just going to put it in brackets to signpost it for the market to make it easier for them to give me credit. Why might these synergies fail to materialize? There could be change management issues. We said that. That was around people or market conditions changing. So the people that are impacted may become less productive, or they might leave the business, and that will increase my costs and reducing returns. And both of those things will reduce our synergies. A second point about changing market conditions, the future is inherently uncertain. There could be a significant one-off event that impacts the business and reduces its profitability and stops these synergies from materializing. Great, so any big external events could prevent these planned synergies from materializing. So to stop them being overestimated, I'm going to use an expert, potentially someone, a consultant or something, who has experience of doing these transactions and knows what synergies are always more realistic in their assessment of synergies. So I'm going to use an experienced or qualified professional, so an external consultant who can critically evaluate the likelihood of synergies arising. And I'd want to get some impartial due diligence on the financial forecasts to reduce the risk of bias. How do I stop these from failing to materialize? Well, I'd want to effectively implement the transaction. And so that means assigning responsibility to set individuals, setting them targets and appraising them against their ability to deliver on these synergies. Nice written answer here. Just want to highlight a couple of things to you. I'm kind of making 1 or 2 sentences per point to keep it short and punchy, and I'm leaving a nice gap after each point to make it really easy for the marker to review. And I'm making sure I've answered all parts of the question by having a structure that links back to the requirement. This is a cracking answer. On now to part B of the question, where we're having to look at a share-for-share exchange offer and do a calculation of the effect of the cash and share-for-share offers on the post-acquisition wealth of the 2 sets of shareholders. This is a calculation question, and so we're going to use the spreadsheet, and actually there's several questions in here, so let's make sure we capture them all. Now, I don't know how much gap I needed to leave between these 2 questions to allow me to do my workings, but I can always move this second question down, can't I, later on if I need to. Right, so we've got to do what's a suitable share-for-share offer that meets the criteria which has been specified. Let's do that bit first of all. And the criteria that has been specified is here, this 30% acquisition premium. Oh, the cash offer is there, $13.10 per share. And here are the extracts that I'm going to need to do my calculations for both Kerin and Danton. I'm told their operating profit, fine, and their earnings before tax. Now, I know the examiner tries to be annoying with tax, and they often put this into lots of different questions as a trick. Do I want before tax earnings when I'm doing a share calculation, or do I want after tax earnings? Well, I know it's after tax earnings because my share investors only get access to profits after tax, don't they? That's where dividends are paid out. So the earnings before tax is not that useful for me. I'm going to need to take into account the tax rate of 20%. So just watching out for that all the way through. Tells me the book value of Kerin's shares is 375 million and they're 50 cents each. Oh, why don't they make them $1? Well, the reason they don't make them $1 is because when I'm working out the number of shares, that makes my life a bit harder. The shares are currently 528. Oh, I could use that to calculate the market capitalization, couldn't I, of Kerin? Great. And the PE ratio will increase by 10% if the acquisition proceeds. So that's for the combined company. It tells me that Danton this year, so after these numbers here, has done something that's going to increase my earnings by 2.5 million pre-tax. Okay, another thing I'm going to need to adjust for tax. And it tells me the book value of the target company, Danton. Their shares are $0.25 each, even more annoying. They're not just $1. And the total book value is 35 million, so I can use that to work out the number of shares, can't I? And it tells me that Danton's PE ratio is 20% higher than Kerin's PE ratio. So if I'm going to work out the value of Danton, I'm going to need to know my PE for Kerin. So that's going to be my starting point. Work out the PE ratio for Kerin and then use that to value Danton. It tells me for the combined company, I've got these synergies of, what's that, 20.5 million, haven't I? We used those earlier in the question too. So let's start doing our calculation then. So I'm bringing in the share capital of the business of 375 million and dividing by the book value of each share to work out the number of shares. Now, I'm having a little conversation with the marker here and telling them what I'm doing in my calculation, but I'm going to use this spreadsheet functionality and the formulas to be able to do this. And that number of shares there is in millions, isn't it? Now, the current share price is $5.28. Got that out of the scenario. And by multiplying the current share price by the number of shares, I'm getting to the market capitalization. Notice that I'm just looking at my formatting as I'm going through and making sure that it's nicely presented so that the marker can easily review my work. And if I've made a mistake, then I'm kind of having a conversation here with the marker so that they can follow through my numbers quite comfortably. Okay, so that is going to be the price part of my PE ratio. Now, to work out the earnings part of my PE ratio, I need to take the current earnings before tax and I'm going to adjust them for tax. But to do that, I'm going to take the earnings figure and times it by 0.8. And because the marker might not necessarily see what I've done there, I'm just going to write them a little explanation. Now, they can go in and audit my numbers. They can go in and see my cell and see that I've times it by 0.8. But I'm trying to make their life a bit easier. I'm thinking about the marker here. So then we can work out my PE ratio by taking the price here of the market capitalization. That's the total share price, and dividing it by the total earnings after tax, which is, a horrible number. And that horrible number, well, what I've done here is I've made it more presentable by looking at the formatting up there, because we're doing it to 2 decimal places. It was a horrible number because it was some disgusting, long, lots and lots of decimal points. But I'm looking at my formatting as I'm going through. Again, the marker could do that for me when they're reviewing my script, but I want to make their life easy. I want to think about them and encourage them to give me more marks. Right, so I now know the PE ratio of Kerin. I can now apply this PE ratio to Danton. So there's Danton's earnings, which are 116.3 from the scenario. But also, we noticed down here that Danton are going to make some cost savings. So their earnings are actually going to be a bit higher. And that's before tax. So I'm going to make them after tax. And actually, I can just copy and paste this entire thing from here, can't I? Because my formulas are smart. So then we've got the PE ratio, which comes from Kerin of 12.96. So we're going to times it by the PE ratio. But we're told that Danton's PE was 20% higher. Okay, and I can now apply that 20% higher PE of 15.55
to get to a valuation for Danton by timesing it by the earnings. So I now know what the two companies are worth. I've got Kerin worth that, and I've got Danton worth that. So the combined company, 5438 million. What I'll need to work out, so that's what the two bits were worth separately and what they'd be worth together if I just added them together. But remember, when I'm adding these businesses together, I've also got these synergies to take into account. And I've got the thought or the idea that the combined company's PE will increase, or Kerin's company PE will increase by 10% if the acquisition proceeds. So that's the value before the transaction of the two companies. Let's work out what it is afterwards. So my Kerin earnings, let's get that from up here. I like a sort of copy and paste type approach. Danton earnings, and my synergies are going to be the 20.5 million times 0.8. So I'm going to have combined earnings of just over 416 million. So now applying a PE ratio, the original price earnings ratio for Kerin is, what was it? Oh, we've got it up here, 12.96. But we're told that it's going to be 10% higher. We're told that in the scenario, weren't we, here? So it's 14.26. And I can now work out my combined company value by taking the PE ratio and timesing it by that earnings figure. So the combined company value before the transaction was 5438. And if the transaction goes ahead, it's going to be a bit higher. And the reason it's going to be a bit higher is because of synergies. The combined company, if the combined value if the transaction goes ahead, the difference between that and what it would have been had the transaction not gone ahead. So I've got synergies of 506 million. Now I need to work out a share for share offer. So 30% acquisition premium, so 30% above the current value of Denton. Okay, so let's start with that number, Denton's current value. That was up here. So Denton's current value is looking there, 1478. And then we're going to add 30% onto it. So when I add that 30% onto the value of Denton's current value, that's the amount of the combined business that the Denton shareholders are going to need to be given. They're going to need 1.9 or 1921 of value. And that's going to come out of the total company value of 5944. So that's the amount for Denton shareholders. And therefore, the amount that's left for the Kerin shareholders is the difference between them. And that's going to be for their 750 million shares that they've already got. So I'm going to need to work out. So 750 million shares is going to be, well, let's have a look at it in percentage terms, actually. So the total company value is going to be 100%. That's 100% of the shares. And then out of the value, well, I'm going to need to work out what percentage is going to Kerin shareholders. And that's going to be their amount of the company's value divided by the total. So they're going to get 67%. And the Denton shareholders, well, they're going to have the balance. So after I've done the share for share exchange, this is what the shareholdings will need to look like. So I'm going to tidy this up a little bit. That's my percentage ownership. And let's turn that as well into a number of shares. That was 750 million, wasn't it, for the Kerin shareholders, because that's the amount they've already got. That's a known number. Then I can work out, so that's 67% of the total. I can then work out what the total number of shares needs to be, and therefore the number of shares to go over to Denton. So if 750 million shares is 67%, then 100%, well, I can do that by taking 750 million, dividing it by 67%, and so gross up to get me to the total number of shares. Or if you're doing it on your calculator, you can work out what 1% is. So you do 750 divided by 67 to work out 1%, and then times by 100%. And therefore the number of shares that go to Denton is just the difference. So I'm going to need to issue 350 million shares to Denton in exchange for the shares they've already got. And we're told they're existing, well, they've got 35 million book value of shares and they're 25 cents each. So that's 140 million shares. Now, the convention with share for share exchanges is for us to present this as a kind of something for something. Now, I want to keep my numbers nice and easy. So I know 100, I can divide both by 10. That looks like something I can do. So that is a 36 for 14 share exchange. And then actually, can I make that a bit simpler? Yeah, I can halve that, can't I? I can divide both of these are divisible by 2. Is it? Yeah, I can do that. So, or it's a 18 for 7. Right, that's the first part of the question answered. What would the suitable share for share offer be? Then the second part, calculate the effect of this on the wealth of both sets of shareholders. Wouldn't it have been easy to forget to do question 2 if we hadn't copied and pasted it down here? I'd have got a bit bogged down, easily could have got bogged down, couldn't I? But having copied and pasted the question down here, it's reminding me that I need to do this second bit of the question. So let's do the cash offer first of all. Let's have 2 columns. We'll have one for each of the different groups of shareholders. So we'll have Kevin first of all, and then Danton. Now, if I'm going to have the effect on their wealth, then I'm going to need to start with their existing wealth. So Kevin had 3,960, and Danton, their business was worth 1,478. Then the cash offer was for 1310 per share. And I'm going to times it by the number of shares that Danton have. They have 140 million shares, don't they? So that's the amount of cash that they received. Now, where's that cash coming from for the Danton business? Where's it coming from? Well, it's coming from the Kevin shareholders, isn't it? Now, the Kevin shareholders have paid out that 1,834, but they'll own the entire business. They'll own the entire amount of 5,944. And the Danton shareholders will own nothing. So the Kevin guys are going to own shares worth 5,944, but they've paid out 1.8 million to get it. And the Danton guys are going to have no shares, but they are going to have a lovely cash balance of 1,834. And so their change in wealth is, well, these guys have increased a bit, and I like to save myself work wherever possible. So that I can just copy across, can't I? It's a formula. Both of them I want to 2 decimal places to make it easy for someone to review. And then we'll turn that into a percentage change. I can copy that across. Lovely. Let's do the same thing, but for the share offer. Okay, now the start of this, I can use my formatting, but I just need to be careful when I'm copying and pasting. I've got to be really careful when copying and pasting in there because it's smart updating the cells, so it's bringing down the wrong number. So my existing wealth is that number there, isn't it? It's that number there. So be really careful when you're copying and pasting. So that's my starting position with this share offer. The revised position for the shareholders is that Kevin is going to own here 4,023, and Danton is going to own here 1,921. I'm going to have a change and then change in percentage terms. Ooh, remarkable, isn't it? On the share offer, look where all the value goes. It's much more towards the company being acquired, the Danton shareholders, rather than Kevin. It's slightly weighted in their favour, so it's not, it doesn't look particularly attractive to Kevin, does it, as things stand? Things to take away from this then, making sure we answer all parts of the question and trying as much as we can to make our answers easy to follow by explaining what we're doing to the marker as we're going through and doing the calculations. Some advice now on reviewing your answer once you've done your answer plan and had a good go at writing up your answer. First thing I'd encourage you to do is obviously look at the examiner's model answers. Now, what's useful out of these is really to pick out any points that you missed. Were there any good technical things that you didn't cover and that they're kind of addressing a kind of knowledge gap for you, perhaps? But what you don't do with the model answers is try to copy the answer style. The answers are far too long. They're not the kind of thing you can do in the time available. They're beautiful, they're pristine, but they're unachievable. So we're not looking to rote learn them. We're just looking at them in terms of content that we missed. We're then going to look at the marking scheme because it can give us some useful advice on how we grade our work. For example, it might tell you the number of marks available per point, normally 1 mark per well-discussed point. And then the most useful document you can look at is the examiner's comments. It tells you the kind of pitfalls that you need to avoid, because those are the things that students did badly on the day of the exam. And they're the things that the examiner is therefore more likely to test on in the future. And it's going to help you to get inside the mind of the examiner. If you can think about how they're trying to examine students, the kind of things they're trying to achieve with the exam, then you can design your answer for their needs. So let's have a go at reviewing our answer to the question we just worked through. Let's look at using the model answer first of all then. Remember, I'm not looking at this in terms of style or amount of content because, well, this answer here by the examiner is nearly 800 words. I've written about 350 words here. So my answer is way shorter. There's no way you could write this amount in the time available. And just look in terms of style, that whole first paragraph is background and introduction. It sets the scene really nicely, but I haven't got time to do that. In the exam, I'm going to need to get going straight away with the content. Otherwise, I've not got no chance of finishing in the time available. So what I'm doing when I'm reading this is looking for things that I've missed. Oh, look, there. Unrelieved tax losses. I didn't say anything about unrelieved tax losses. Now, how did I miss those? Well, if you look back in the question, oh, look, there was this bit about significant unrelieved tax losses. Darn, I missed those. So, lesson to myself. Next time, make sure I mind the scenario even more heavily, because by missing that point, I missed out on some analysis. Oops. And then look down here. In my overestimation of the synergy value stuff, there's some points in here that I didn't make, like deal advisors wanting this to go through and cheap credit promoting it. So there's a few things that I missed. Okay, but I'm pretty happy that a lot of the points that I got in the answer there that are in the answer are things that I put. Let's then look at using the second really helpful document, which is the marking scheme, when that's at the end of the answers. Okay. Oh, we're not really given very much that's helpful here. 4 to 5 marks for financial synergies, 2 to 3 marks for overestimating the synergies, and 1 to 2 marks for these proposed steps. So I guess all I can really do with that is look at it and go, well, it's going to be 1 mark per relevant point. Did I have 4 or 5 here? Yeah, I did. Maybe I slightly overdid it in the overestimation of the synergies because I've got 5 or 6 points there. But I'm fairly happy that I've written a reasonable amount. And what I'd have to be doing here is each one of these going back to the model answer and going, is this something that was in there? If so, give myself a mark for it if it's been fully explained. Then the other document that is even more useful, the examiner's report. Now, the general section here is got loads of good stuff in it, but where the real value is when I look at the particular question I've just answered. And this is going to help me for the marking, actually. So question 3, it was the synergies, mergers and acquisitions question. And look, if you read through part A, many students discuss non-financial synergies like revenue and cost synergies. They didn't read the question carefully and they wasted their time because no marks were given for this sort of discussion. So I'd be looking at mine now and going, are they actually financial synergies, or are these things about generating more sales, revenue synergies, or cutting out costs, cost synergies? And actually, I'm pretty happy that I have answered the question here. But reading the examiner's comment here is telling me something that students did badly on the day. Now, the real problem of having discussed non-financial synergies, not only would it have earned you no marks, it also would have cost you time, so it's a double whammy. So a huge learning point here is about reading the question carefully and only answering the question that has been set. But by using the examiner's comments here, I'm adding a bit of extra value over what is in the model answers and in the marking scheme.
Brilliant. So that was the video from Ben. Ben, I can see you were just talking there, but I couldn't hear anything, so I think you're potentially still on mute.
Thanks, Lucy. Technical error there, user error. So yes, so that's the video, and hopefully you found lots of useful exam technique points in there. So we've had loads and loads of questions coming in whilst the video was playing. So thank you for all of those. I've got through as many as possible. I'm just going to summarise a few of those questions because there were some common themes that it's really worth sharing with the wider group. So one common question that came in was about how many points do I need to write in a written answer? How many marks are there per point? And it's a difficult question to answer because in AFM, it depends. So in general, it's 1 mark per well-explained point. But the markers are encouraged to read your full written answer and decide whether you knew enough, whether you demonstrated enough understanding to be awarded a pass mark for that question. So let's say it's out of 6 and you wrote 2 or 3 decent points that showed some strong understanding, well, they might give you 4 or 5 out of 6. Now, that's hard for you to run with. That is how it's marked. But if for your own mindset of how much do I need to write, I would be thinking 1 well-explained point per mark of the requirement will be more than enough to answer it. And for something to be well explained, it needs to have a fact from the scenario and it needs to be developed. You need to be answering the question, so what? What is the implication of this point? Another common question theme that came in was around the calculations. Can you do your calculations as a formula? And hopefully I answered that actually in the presentation. But yes, you can show your calculation as a formula in Excel because the marker can go into your cells. They can click in and see your formulas. But I'd strongly encourage you to set out your answer in stages. Don't have a big, long, complicated formula with lots of stages in it and try and be clever with the Excel, because it makes it hard to mark if you've made a mistake. Set out the answer into clear stages and ideally with a little explanation of each stage next to it so the marker can follow what you've done. Another question I had, the common theme, was around what order should I do the exam paper in? You know, do I start with section A, the case study question, the long question? Do I start with section B, one of the shorter questions? And within a question, do I have to do it in order? So my advice to you is to start with the question you feel most comfortable with. If there's a topic area that you really like, or you think there's a subject in there that you think you can nail, start there. Build up your confidence, because that then, having built up your confidence in that first question, let's say it's section B, then you are more likely to attempt the rest of the paper with that confident juice flowing through you. You're more likely to do a better job elsewhere in the exam. It's also worth noting that within a single question, you don't have to do it in order. If you like the look of part D, it's an easy part, you can do that first. That's absolutely fine. Just watch out though, because sometimes part B requires you to have answered part A first of all. So just take care with that. Just going to have a look in the Q&A panel and see if there's any other further questions that have come in that I can answer in just a couple of minutes before we finish. Managing time. So I've had a lot of questions on managing time. So managing time in the exam, I would advise you to do it macro and micro. So macro, give yourself an amount of time for that particular entire question. So in section A, it's 1.5 hours. In section B, it's 45 minutes per question. And that leaves you with a little bit of buffer time, the 15 minutes extra in case something goes wrong. So set out of that amount of time in overall, and then each individual requirement, giving yourself 1.8 minutes per mark and forcing yourself to be disciplined. And the way you develop your exam speed is by practicing questions to time. It's like training. If you're training for a marathon, you need to put in the hard yards and you need to be building yourself up for it. The way you do that for exam training is you are practicing questions to time. Okay. Is there any more general ones I can answer? We've just got another minute or so. Okay, for people who are resitting, what can you do differently next time? What I'd advise you if you're resitting, number one, make sure that you have a go at the exam that you failed. So look at the sample questions from that sitting and try to identify where it is that you went wrong. And the other thing that's really helpful is the examiner's articles. Quite often students don't really use those. And they're written by the examining team, and they often contain a practice question on that syllabus area that is exam standard. And they contain notes that the examiner is giving you to try to boost you in that particular area. So if you are resitting and last time out you didn't really use the examiner's articles, make sure that you use those fully this time around.